Welcome to the Ride With Us podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Prescott Rodeo grounds and the world's oldest rodeo. Its history, traditions, some storytelling, and all the events happening at the rodeo grounds. I'm your host, Greg Mengarelli. Today we have one of our rodeo patriarchs, a gentleman who played a large role in our past, ensuring that the world's oldest rodeo happened through some tumultuous times, as well as facilitating a historic movie about rodeo right here in Prescott, Arizona. He is a legend and will forever be a standard bearer for our beloved rodeo. He's a good friend and a man I have tremendous respect for. Bill Pierce. Bill, thanks for coming in on the show today, and thank you for all you've done and continue to do for the rodeo. It's a real pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Greg. It's really quite an honor to continue to show my support for something that I was so involved in several years. It was a love of mine as well as part of my family life because all my kids went into rodeo and my son went on professionally, so in roping. So yeah, I tried a few times, but those were the days that in team roping, you had to get off the head horse and tie the hind feet of the steer, and I made sure Art Savolini was the header and I was the heeler because I wasn't going to get off and get down in that mess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you've always been so gracious to me, Bill. When I ask you about the history of the rodeo, you've always been real generous with your time to tell me some of your stories, and I don't think I've heard all of them. I hope to hear more stories today. But this is real important for our listeners because there's a lot of new folks in town, and we love them coming into our city and being a part of our community. And this is a very important part of who Prescott is, our region. The rodeo, as you know, has been a long-standing tradition since 1888. And this is a way that our listeners can get a better understanding of the history coming right from one of the folks that, created this history that we're going to talk about. So thanks again for being on the show. I want to first, if you wouldn't mind, I know you've done a lot of reading of the history of the rodeo, and you've probably talked to folks who were older than you that were a part of the rodeo really before you officially got involved with the rodeo. So talk to us about some of those years in the 30s and 40s and back that way, your understanding.
Right. I was not there in the 30s.
I know.
I was born in 35, so
Okay.
You can put the pencil to it that I'm 88 plus, soon be in May 89. So, but in reading and understanding through a lot of my friends that were involved, that the rodeo, because of several reasons, was hitting some financial problems, the depression, that was horrible. My folks lived through it. I was on the tail end of it. And then we also had prohibition, which whether you support it or not, it is sometimes very instrumental into an event to have the benefit of having beer, wine, whiskey, whatever, and don't support excess, but it does add to the revenue, and that's the enjoyment of it. So they started out with, they decided, a bunch of the local guys to put on an Indian powwow to raise money for the rodeo. According to people that did witness it or were part of it, it became quite a rowdy event. Prohibition didn't affect that party. They had plenty. And so they raised some money, and then they decided to do it again and raise more money the next year. Then a group looked at that and decided that why don't we do it professionally? And that's where I'm hesitating here on the Smoke Eye people. I know who I'm trying to. The Smoke Eye people were created, but unfortunately, the museum has been changed now to indigenous people. But it started out with Smoke Eye people. Smoke Eye is not a real tribe.
Right.
It's something that they made up. I had a lot of friends in Smoke Eye. I was asked to join, and one of the few things I didn't because I was so involved with the Fair Association, the rodeo, and 4-H. I was 4-H leader for years, and also sponsored the junior livestock division at the county fair for several years. So that is how Smoke Eye got started, and they continued to research. They went to Washington, went into the various museums that house some of the pictures and things, and they really made it first class. It became one of the, not better than the rodeo, but equal in drawing people's attention. And it was done at the rodeo grounds.
Right.
They had their wiki up there. They had their tunnels there where they would come out with snakes in their mouths. And so that was how that one got started.
Well, and those folks that started the Smoke Eye tradition, really it was all about supporting the rodeo and raising money. And the intent was to raise money to keep the rodeo going and to bring education and attention to the Native American people here in our region.
Right.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now it's interesting, in the 30s there with the Depression, we know it was a very, very difficult financial situation for our whole country. But somehow they were able to keep the rodeo going every year. May not have been real big, I suppose, but there was always a rodeo.
Yes.
Even through the 30s. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. So tell us a little bit about the Fair Association. They played a pretty big part in making sure the rodeo was held. Is it in the 40s and 50s that the Fair Association was in charge of the rodeo
I believe, don't hold me definitely to it. I should have looked in my book. I think they came in the 30s after everybody got back on feet again.
Okay.
The Fair Association agreed to take it over because the Fair Association, the county owned the property at the time where we now have the Frontier Days. And the county leased it to the Fair Association for $1. And I don't think we ever paid it, but for contract issues. And so when they took over the rodeo, they didn't have the ability to actually put on the rodeo. They had to hire outside contractors. The Fair Association, except at fair time with part-time people, because I was involved with it over the years and later became president, we never had more than 3 or possibly 4 employees.
Okay.
Our big issue was that in the early 60s, the Fair Association took on the racing and the commercial racing. But yet, there again, they couldn't afford to do it. So they leased the running of the races from May to September to a group out of Phoenix called Funk Brothers. There were two brothers that owned the dog tracks down there, and they knew racing, and they were connected to back east people. And I hope I won't get in any trouble here, but a lot of people thought they were part of the mafia, but I dealt with them as president, and they were straight up as far as I was concerned. What they did, we signed a 10-year contract at $50,000 a year. That contract, that $50,000 was to cover the fair, cover the rodeo, cover any other events that we had, and the 2 or 3 employees. So
$50,000 went a lot farther back then than it does now.
Yes, it did. But that's some of the issue that brings us down to 1966, when we got through with the 66 rodeo. Harold James was the overall chairman. The stock contractor was Andy Urager out of California. His cost, just in transportation alone, plus others, were just tremendous. And as a result, we lost money.
Right. 2
or 3 years in a row.
Leading up to 1966.
Leading up to 1966. Okay. And in 1966, at the end of that particular rodeo, we were about $16,000 short, and trying to take that out of the $50,000 from our overall income.
Right. The mafia money.
Right.
You heard it here. The rodeo had ties to the mafia.
No. Anyway, they had a contract. The only connection was they had a contract for the beverages and all of that from a company called Sport Services. And Jerry Jacobs owned Sport Services, and yes, he was somehow indicted with some mafia issues.
See?
So it does kind of tie back a little bit. But my dealings with him were always straight up. But so in 66, after the rodeo, we got our money all together, and this $16,000 is after our part of the entry fees and our part of the grandstand.
Right.
But we weren't getting any revenue from the food and beverage.
Oh, okay.
That went to Funk
Brothers, okay.
So there was a meeting, and several fair board members plus some outsiders came because they had heard about it. Prescott was small in those days, compared to today.
Right.
And they just said, you can't keep doing it. Can you break the Funk Brothers contract? Well, the attorneys, Ted Beck, said, no, you can't break it. It's legitimate. So
there's always some really bad consequences if you break a contract with the mafia, Bill.
Greg, you're putting words in my mouth.
I'm just kidding you. So,
I know you were.
So you were trying to figure out if you get out of that contract.
So I told him, we just knew we couldn't get out of it.
Right.
But they were talking about all this was going around, that we needed to just shut the rodeo down, and I said, if I can go out, I didn't know how, but I just blurbed it out, as I've done several times in different meetings, that I can do this or this and not give it a second thought. And I said, if I can go out and raise $16,000 to bring us even, can we go one more year? And they didn't think I could do it. Well, over the next week or so, I just started at St. Michael's, went to Matt's. Matt Butita was my best friend. Then I went to Shell Dunbar at the Palace. Then I went down to Ken Wayman at Weston Bar. And I've dropped the name of my friend at the Birdcage at the time, who it was. But anyway, they all just instantly $1,000 a piece.
Wow, that's a lot of money back then.
It was, but they made them a lot of money over 3 to 4 days.
Yes, they did.
I mean, that's where everybody congregated in the evenings, and after the rodeo parade, they'd
sell a lot of beer down there.
Yeah, but then also people coming in from out of town were staying at the hotels.
Right.
So I went out and went to just about every motel on Gurley Street, and also went to the Sunset Restaurant that Powers owned. And I'm just trying to remember those. Anyway, I came back with about $18,000
in a week.
Just a little over a week, yeah.
Wow.
And of course, I went to Savellini's. They kicked in. Trying to remember if I got anything from like grocery stores or whatever. I don't think so. I got it all, I think, from
hotels and bars.
And motels.
It's interesting, Bill, you're talking about Whiskey Row, and our listeners who are new to town will recognize these names, right? Hotel St. Michael, Matt's Saloon, the Palace Bar, the Birdcage. I mean, those are all still there.
Unfortunately, Western's gone. Somebody else has the same place, but they've changed the name. And
right.
I'm sorry, I don't remember it, but it's still there.
Yeah. So you overshot your goal. You got $18,000 and you only needed $16,000.
Well, we needed all I could get, but that was the goal. And so I presented it, and James didn't want to be chairman the next year.
Harold James, okay.
Yeah, because that's who I had worked under in 1966.
Right.
And so Harold didn't want to do it. So they asked me if I would take first overall chairman, which I did in 1967. I had to see about the rodeo. I had to see about the parade. I had to see about, what all takes place. You've been doing it now.
Right.
It isn't just going out there and bucking a few horses out. It's a lot more than that. Parking is a huge situation.
Yeah.
So I did it, got a few people to help me. So we were successful because we brought John Kekeffer in. John had, in late 1966, bought a small stock contractor. And so of course, John, his family's been a friend of mine. I could tell you a racing story that nobody would believe, but I could tell it to you.
I want to hear that story, and I want to go back because our listeners, many of them, probably don't understand that there was a racetrack there on the Prescott Rodeo grounds.
Right.
And that track was functional up until the 90s, right?
Yes.
And for decades, raced horses there, right?
Right.
And so I want to make sure everybody knows there was a racetrack around the rodeo grounds there, but tell us your story about John and the racetrack.
Well, John came in, and as a result of he and his family owning the K4 Ranch just out Williamson Valley and on
North of
out.
town. Yeah.
And so bringing the stock in, the costs were probably, I don't even want to compare how much less it was than you regularly bring it in. So John had us a contract that actually we could live with.
Right.
And so that year, after I had done in 68, I got the JCs involved because I just, after 67, trying to do it all. I mean, I had help, but not official help. It was just my son and I were up at 4:30 in the morning putting the last post in the hole because we couldn't keep the chutes up. We had to take them down because of racing, and we had to take them down because of smoke eye. So we could only get them up during rodeo time.
Oh, the whole arena then you were building right before the rodeo.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And we could only get, because the racing had started in May, and we couldn't take the railings down. We couldn't bring in our chutes.
Right.
So the night before the first performance, my 16-year-old son and I are putting the last, you've met Bill.
Right.
And he's a businessman here in town. I'm so grateful he stayed here and been very successful. And but he and I we had to put a piece of telephone pole to attach the very end of the chutes so that they would stay stable and whatever. Right. So we were doing that at 4:30 in the morning, and we were going to have a rodeo the next day, you know.
Right. So, and there's your point is there's no organization or association. The Fair Association's not a part at this point, and it's just you and your son and a handful of people putting the rodeo on, and you were looking to find some folks to help out.
The Fair Association was sponsoring it, but not the only part that the Fair Association really, because of their lack of employees and all trying to do this in this $50,000, they did provide the tractor work for grading the arena. Okay. And they did help me take the railings down because they wanted to store them, because we by contract had to have them back up the weekend after the rodeo, depending on when the rodeo occurred. Okay. So, So the next year, I had, in the meantime, the JCs were just getting started. Group of nice young guys and professionals. Matter of fact, one of our members later became Superior Court Judge, Jim Hancock. We had the city manager was on the JCs, and what we did is I assigned them all of these. I made one guy was chairman, so he could have a title, and he would direct, and I retained solely the rodeo because that was my love. Right. And that was the biggest portion of it. Right. But you had the rodeo parade, you had we were starting to do the dances down at Albertsons and, but not Albertsons anymore.
Sprouts, but yeah.
And so we had a guy in charge of that. And so that's how I got the JCs involved.
Split up the duties. And this started in 1968 when you got the JCs on board. Right. So you survived 67 okay financially, did all right there.
Came out perfect. I mean, sure, you always like to have more, but we came out in the in the good side. Yeah.
So you mentioned a racing story with John Kekeffer.
Well, I was with his dad.
Okay.
Bob Kekeffer was and actually was on the racing commission at one time. Bob Kekeffer is the son of John Kekeffer. John Kekeffer was the chairman of the board of the Weyhauser Corporation.
Yes.
And that was a very large corporation.
Yep.
And Bob, I think, was involved with Weyerhaeuser for a while, but then he came west, and his dad bought the K4.
Yes.
And so Bob started running the K4, and then he had John, he had John Sr.
Right.
And so John Sr. was a bachelor for a long time, and then he married Linda, who was his rodeo secretary. And so they made a great team in running the rodeo part.
Yes.
She was the secretary, did all, I mean, that's a thankless job. What time am I? What time am I? I'm out. When did you get my money?
Right.
They drive her nuts. You know that.
Cowboys bothering. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Linda took care of all that for us, and because we still didn't have an organization like you have today.
Sure.
It was still me on the rodeo and my other guys out here on the periphery.
Yep.
Doing those things. So during a time when not Doug Babbitt, I forget Babbitt's name, that was governor, actually he was attorney general. He was out of Flagstaff. His folks owned Babbitt Ford and all that. He became the attorney general.
Okay.
And for some reason, he just hated the Funk Brothers. And so he was arguing with the racetrack that they should not get their next year. We had to get a permit every year.
From the state?
From the racing board,
yes.
Racing Commission.
Right.
So Ted Beck and I flew down, and we attended that. I was president of the Fair Association. So this is after my giving up the rodeo to the JCs in 71.
Okay.
This would have been in about 75.
Okay.
And so they're arguing that they shouldn't have it. They're involved with sports services, Jerry Jacobs, all these East Coast, New Jersey mafia, whatever. So Ted and I are sitting there, and the chairman said, if we don't give the permit to these people, can you run it? And I don't know where this came from. I said, how much money do you think we would need to run it? And he said, about $225,000, $250,000. I said, let me go call my banker. We probably had $500 in the bank. I didn't call First National Bank. I called Bob Kekeffer. I said, Bob, here's what they want to know. He said, hold on. He came back and he said, it's in your account. You can legally tell them you have $250,000.
He literally got it done just that fast.
On a phone call. But they did go ahead and give the permit to Funk Brothers. So I didn't have to figure a way to give Bob his money back.
Yeah.
Or run the races,
Right.
which I didn't want to do.
Sure.
As president, I was involved with the races a lot. We had a jockey strike. They wanted $5,000 more. Well, here I am, 4 kids, running an insurance agency, and they want $5,000. We didn't have it in the Fair Association. So who did I call? I called Bob Kekeffer. He said, guarantee it. You have it. I did this probably about 3 or 4 times. The horseman did something, and Bob was just a true friend, not just of me, but of Prescott.
Right.
He loved Prescott.
Right.
And brought those boys up, John and now John's boys, to be a part of this community.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that underscores the support of Bob Kekeffer and really the whole Kekeffer family for the rodeo.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned John Kekeffer had a stock contracting company. And just for our listeners' sake, from back those days to today, there are contractors that have much of the stock, not always all the stock, but the rough stock. Many times the steers you're roping, and that's what a stock contractor does, is bring that livestock to the rodeo. And you'd mentioned that John had bought a stock contracting company. And did he start in 67 or 68 with that?
Started in late of 66.
Okay.
Because I had him in 67.
Gotcha.
And that's what saved us for the year of 67.
What did he charge you for the stock?
I can't remember that. Remember I told you earlier, soon to be 89 years old. It was very reasonable.
That was
and
my point.
The big thing was, Greg, that he only hauled it 15 miles.
Right.
Because he kept everything at the ranch.
Right. Yeah. Now, he did that for a couple years?
He did it through 72.
72. Okay.
He did 71 for Junior Bonner, and then he did one more, and then he retired and sold the company.
Yeah. So he did it through the end of the 60s into 72. And then at that point is when we got Harry Volt.
Right.
Yeah. And Harry Volt, of course, isn't with us anymore, but his daughter, Kirsten Volt, with Volt Rodeo.
And that was the time also that more organization took place under Cam Smith, where got out and got more people involved, created a corporation, I believe, in about that period of time.
Yeah.
And that's when it became so much more professional than the way we did it. We had good results.
Sure.
We did it the old-fashioned way, but you needed an organization like you have now.
Yep.
And I admire what you guys do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's mostly Jim Dewey Brown, his leadership.
Well,
So I want to go back to the late 70s. Of course, you were still involved with the rodeo at some level then, maybe not as the chairman or the president of the organization, but was Larry Mahan brought to the rodeo there? Was it in 1979? No. When did Larry come to the rodeo?
It's either 69 or 70.
Oh, right in the middle of your era.
Yeah, because I paid his entry fees.
Okay. So Larry Mahan, Larry Mahan, for the audience, arguably the GOAT, greatest of all time, one of the best cowboys ever, who we unfortunately recently lost, Larry, in the last year. But tell us the story about bringing Larry Mahan to the rodeo, and why did you do that? Okay,
this was right after trying to get it to come back and to get more contestants.
Okay.
And John was my stock contractor. So John came to me and said, I know Larry Mahan. If I can get him to come up and enter, will the Fair Association pay his entry fee? I said, I don't know if they will or not, but I will. And sure enough, it brought a lot of contestants to come in to say, I competed against Larry Mahan.
Sure.
And he entered all of his events. And you have a video of John Kekeffer supporting the rodeo, and he's sitting on the stands.
Yes.
And he says, I wonder if Bill Pierce ever got his money back from paying Larry Mahan's fees. No, I didn't. I paid him same as I did in the movie Billy Jack. They took off and took the boys club mats out of the fight scene down on Cortez, and I had to buy the boys club personally more wrestling mats because McLaughlin is not he's dead, but he was not a very favorite person of mine for a while.
Okay.
That's some of the things you get into when you're trying to, and I was not paid anything.
Sure.
Greg, everything I did was because of my love of Prescott and for the ability of my kids to all grow up here, stay here, and be in some sort of business or profession.
Sure.
Daughter, school nurse, 32 years at Prescott Valley Humboldt School District. My son, Pierce Property Management for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter and her husband have Prusina Pierce Stucco and construction. And
right.
so my oldest daughter was a paralegal for a long time for a major law firm in Phoenix. So,
right.
But she has come home now.
Right.
So I have them all here.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
It paid off. So I want to talk a little bit about some historic ranches around Prescott because they really were instrumental in the rodeo. And I want to talk about Deep Well Ranch and get a little bit of your history with the beginning of Deep Well Ranch. I want to talk a little bit about Rafter 11, which is kind of based out of right here in Prescott Valley. And then I want to talk a little bit about Chuck Shepard. You mentioned him a little bit, and you knew Chuck, and he was another great from Prescott. But with Deep Well Ranch, people are familiar with a housing development north of town in Deep Well Ranch, but there's a expansive ranch to the north there that's still active. Tell us a little bit about what you know about the founding of that ranch.
Okay. I became involved with the founding of the ranch is Mitzi James was from a very, you don't like to judge, but it was very evident. Her father was very wealthy.
Yes.
Just put it there.
Sure.
He owned a medical supply business.
Okay.
And manufacturing medical instruments. Well, Mitzi was not married, put it that way. And so she went to a dude ranch just to get away.
Okay.
And this one wrangler was assigned to her, and that was Harold James. And Harold helped her get on her horse and do the things that she had never done before. And then I think I'm not quite sure how many times she came back.
Okay.
But eventually they got married. And she asked Harold, I guess, what he wanted for a wedding present. And this is assumption.
Yeah.
Because it ended up happening. And he said a ranch. So she bought the Deep Well Ranch, which came from the city limits of Prescott all the way to Chino.
Yes.
And back around Chino.
Yes.
And there were no housing on it at that particular time. It was just the ranch, and they built a rock house, a beautiful rock house for their home. And so Harold then really got involved in, the ranching, the livestock.
Yes.
They bordered on Williamson Valley Road, and they offered an area and a side of beef for the Cowboy Church every summer.
Okay.
And I went to every one of them.
Right.
But I got involved with Ms. James to be her insurance agent.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I had it at the time the rock house caught on fire.
Oh.
Well, I'm a captain in the fire department, and we're out there trying to save this house.
Right.
But I knew where all the valuables were in her office. So I'm saying, let the kitchen burn. Get to the office, get on the wall with all these original paintings and get all of that out of here.
Gosh.
And we can rebuild a house, but we grabbed her desk and all of that stuff and took it out. Then Hartford Insurance rebuilt it for her.
Okay.
That's who I had her insured with.
Nice.
But that was one of our major fires right after we had first gotten our trucks.
Okay.
And so there was no fire hydrant. So we were having to go all the way back to the airport to get water and fill our tender to come back and fill the actual 2 trucks that were fighting the fire.
Yeah, it's about 3 miles maybe or something, back and forth. Yeah, wow. Yeah. You were the insurance agent and the fire captain. That's a good story. Sir. So Harold and Mitzi had Deep Well Ranch and involved with the rodeo and supporting the rodeo in the community there.
Harold became chairman.
Okay.
And in 1966.
Okay.
And I had gotten to know him at the ranch.
Yes.
And also got him later to take the covered wagon and oxen. He had a 16 yoke.
6 oxen.
Yeah, 6 oxen that were yoked together to pull this covered wagon. And we had Prescott Frontier Days on the canopy.
Okay.
We took it to Scottsdale. We took it to Tucson, took it to Wickenburg. And I would go and I worked the back oxen. You do them with a stick.
Right.
And when I didn't do it right, he's yelling over at me, "Now, if you can't do it, get out," or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And so anyway,
that's good.
So he was very active in that year of rodeo and then helping us in doing with the oxen.
Yeah. The marketing. Yeah, that's good. So you also are familiar with some of the patriarchs here with Rafter 11 and the ranch out here in Prescott Valley.
I go back years with knowing through different connections Norman Payne. And Norman, of course, was the father of Bill and grandfather of Brad and
Ron.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Ron, yeah. So Norman told himself that, and actually told me, because I tried to get his insurance, and he said, first question he said was, "Can you loan me?" And he threw a number out, some fictitious number. I said, "No, Norman, I can't." He said, "Valley National does, and they have an insurance department. And when I sign that note, they say, you go right over there and get your insurance." So same thing happened when I went down to Baghdad and tried to get the Baghdad insurance. I wasn't afraid to go talk to him, but Mr. Jackson, who was his manager, he said, "I'm sorry." he said, and it was also Valley National Bank. He said, "Can you loan us this amount of money?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, they did, and they send us right around the corner." Yeah. So that's how that happened.
Gotcha.
But then I got to know Bill because we were close to the same age.
Yes. Yeah.
In different situations. I'm trying to remember if we were in Lions Club together or some other organization, but met Bill many, many times,
Yeah.
And have met the boys a couple of times.
Yes. Yeah.
Not boys anymore, the young men.
Well, you can call them boys.
Yeah.
And they're still big supporters, of course, of the rodeo sponsors and in the Buckle Club and all that. So you mentioned Chuck Shepard earlier in the show, and he's one of probably arguably one of the best cowboys to come out of Prescott. Has won a world championship. What was your relationship with Chuck?
I met Chuck in the horse posse and the Yavapai County Sheriff's Posse. And then I started going to rodeos, not rodeos, jackpots.
Okay.
And got very involved with Chuck in putting on some of those and having him be our arena director and whatever.
Right.
And we just became friends.
Right.
And at a tremendous age difference. He, like I told you earlier, he called me son, and everything was son. And son, do this. Get that, dude. And he was a little bossy.
Yeah.
And had every right to be, because I had tremendous respect for him.
Right.
One of the last few jackpots was he was coming to out to Chino, and my son had an arena there, and Chuck was coming and roping, and Billy was holding ropings out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He really loved to team rope. I know he did tie down roping as well. I've seen some pictures.
Yeah.
And then of course he was the foreman out at K4.
Right.
K4 Ranch for a number of years.
And unfortunately had that incident of defending Linda when one of the hands attacked her with a knife.
Yeah.
And Chuck stepped up as a dad.
Yeah. Yeah, he was protecting his family there, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, lots of good stories. Bill, I really appreciate you coming in. Is there a story we missed here somewhere? Because I sure would hate to miss a good story.
No, I think we've covered it pretty good.
Covered some good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you. It doesn't seem like enough to say just thank you for all that you've done for the rodeo. You've been around it for decades and really helped us in 1966 when many folks were ready to give it up. And we know that would have been a big mistake now. So I appreciate your willingness to go out there and pass the hat, as we say, and raise the money to make sure that we had a rodeo in 1967. Well, Bill, thanks so much for being with us today on part 1 of the Ride With Us podcast with Bill Pierce. We're going to sign off at this point, but come on back for part 2 with Bill Pierce